Hi, I'm Scott Onetto. I'm with the University of California Cooperative Extension, and today we're in beautiful historic Jackson, California, where we're going to be talking about gold. And this isn't the gold the early miners were looking for. This is black gold. Today we're going to be talking about this here, black gold, which is compost, and some of the benefits of compost. Join us as we go take a look at how we're using compost on annual rangelands here in Amador County. Today, I'm out here with Amanda Watson with the Amador Resource Conservation District and Molly Taylor from PT Ranch to talk about an exciting new project that we're doing looking at the potential benefits of adding compost to annual rangelands. So a little bit about this project. As I mentioned, we're looking at the potential benefits of adding compost to annual rangelands, and if anybody's a home gardener or even a farmer, you know the added value of compost and what it can do to increase the soil richness and increase plant growth. And that's basically what we want to do here with annual rangelands covering, basically being the largest land use in the state of California. We want to examine what the potential benefits could be of adding compost on such a large scale. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to talk a little bit about the Amador Resource Conservation District and this project.
Thanks, Scott. My name's Amanda Watson, and I work with the Amador Resource Conservation Districts. Resource Conservation Districts were founded in the 1950s to help landowners and agricultural producers deal with the effects of the Dust Bowl. Across the nation, resource conservation districts work with landowners on working lands, in agriculture, on forested lands, to help improve the natural resources of the land and keep local agriculture viable. In my role as the district manager of the Amador RCD, I work with our board members and our partners and the agriculturists in the area to identify issues of natural resource concern, try to address those issues by bringing in expertise, technical assistance, and also funding. In this project, the Amador RCD applied for funding through Western SARE to get these trials completed and work with the University Cooperative Extension and Scott Onetto to design and facilitate this research study of applying compost and looking at the results and how that could be beneficial to the working lands in California. The property we're on now is actually owned by the Motherlode Land Trust. It's a historic property, and so that was another great example of how we work with our partners, with University Cooperative Extension, our ranching partners, and also land trusts and other community organizations.
So this last fall, we added compost to 5 different ranches across Amador County. To give you a little bit of highlights of the trial, we basically have 4 different treatments in this trial, and at each location we replicate each of those treatments 3 times, and so we can have good data for being able to analyze those differences. And so the 4 treatments are basically compost. So we applied a 1/2 inch of compost to the rangelands as one treatment. Another treatment was seed only, so we added just seed, this cover crop clover seed, to some of the treatments. The 3rd treatment was a combination of the seed and the compost. And the 4th treatment was basically an untreated check, so basically no treatment. Didn't get any compost, didn't get any seed, it's just what is at the natural environment. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the mechanics of how this project got started. So last September, we purchased compost from Vicini Brothers. They're located just outside of Ione in Plymouth, California. And as I mentioned, as part of this trial, we were looking at adding a 1/2 inch of compost per acre to these annual rangelands. And so to do the math for you, that basically works out to be around 65 to 67 cubic yards per acre. The cost of the compost can vary dramatically across the state or from sources. We were purchasing the compost for about $10 per cubic yard, and that of course did not include any cost for delivery or for applications. So in terms of applying the compost, there's all sorts of different equipment that are available for making these sorts of applications. One of the things that I mentioned first as Many of these sites with annual rangelands can be very unique in the sense that these aren't flat farming cropping systems where often compost can be applied. And so that makes it both unique but also can be a challenge, because we're talking about environments that have various trees and shrub components that you have to be able to get around, but also various topography with sometimes hills or very steep slopes, and also undulating little gullies, and of course rocks. And so all of those can be a bit of a challenge and an obstacle. And so in terms of the equipment that we used for this project, we used a medium-sized tractor and also I would say medium-sized compost / fertilizer spreader. The spreader that we used was a little bit on the smaller side because we wanted to have extreme accuracy for getting the 1/2 inch of compost per acre, but also we had fairly small plots. These were 1/2 acre size treatments, and so we wanted to be able to get into these 1/2 acre blocks to make our applications. This particular spreader that we used basically had just one chute on the back side of the bin with a drive belt that moved the compost to the rear of the spreader and then sling the compost out. Other types of equipment that are available include what are called slide slingers, which basically have augers in the actual applicator, and by turning the augers, the compost is slung to either side, which can be very effective for large areas where you need to be able to disseminate compost on a much larger scale. So to tell you a little bit about the seed mix that we use, so this was basically a clover mix that we purchased from a seed company in the Central Valley called Compost Seed Company, and they have a variety of different clover seed mixes available. The one that we used for this trial was called their medium rainfall mix, and it basically is a compilation of about 6 different clover species that perform well under medium rainfall, which equivalates to about 18 to about 20 inches of annual precipitation per year. This particular clover mix included things like subterranean clover, and I believe there was 3 different types of subterranean clover in this mix. There was also rose clover, which I'll grab one here as we start seeing some of these clovers. This is rose clover here, very, very common clover throughout many of the rangelands here in the Sierra Nevada foothills. And then it included another clover, which I haven't seen in this area, but it actually is performing quite well. This is Persian clover, and in a couple of our sites, it did extremely well. And then besides those, it also includes some medics. The seed mix that we used, we applied at 20 pounds of seed per acre, and we used basically just a bin seeder on the back of the tractor to broadcast that seed mix just before the fall rains in the middle of September. So one of the components to this project was we wanted to evaluate forage, and in terms of forage, we were looking at 2 major components, not only the amount of forage produced, but also the quality of forage produced. And so many of these sites tend to be fairly low in nutrients, both in nitrogen, organic matter, and other essential elements for plant growth. And so we wanted to see whether or not the addition of compost could increase total plant growth, and also whether or not that plant growth would be more nutritious. And so I'm sitting or kneeling right here in between 2 different treatments. This treatment here on my left, this was the treatment where we added both compost and the clover seed mix. And to the right of me is a control area where we did not make any applications. And it's very telling just standing here right on the buffer between these 2. The cows that just got pulled out of here really focused and grazed heavily on this area where the compost and clover is. You can see that the forage is very, very short, and moving outside of this plot, it's predominantly grasses that are very, very tall. And so this tells me that the animals were primarily grazing in this plot here, where there was lots of clover, and potentially this forage was more nutritious. So another component to this project was looking at soil and soil health and all the things that are going on below the ground. And so in these areas, many of them I would say are characteristically poor soils, low in nutrients, low in nitrogen, low in phosphorus, but also extremely low in organic matter. And so we wanted to see whether or not the addition of compost would increase these nutrients, but also increase organic matter. And so the other things that we wanted to look at as part of the soil health was things like water infiltration, whether or not more water would actually percolate down into the soil profile, making that water available for plant growth later on in the season. And we also wanted to look at whether or not the addition of compost may decrease the bulk density, or basically the compaction of the soil over time. And so those are some of the different attributes that we are looking at with soil. All of those things probably could fall under a much larger umbrella or category of things that we're interested in, which would be soil carbon, and more importantly, carbon sequestration, with annual rangelands being the largest land use here in California. It's really an important piece to look at whether or not we could increase or sequester more carbon over this very large land use. And so we'll be looking at carbon sequestration throughout the duration of this project. One other component that we are evaluating with this project is the impact on invasive plants. I'm standing amongst a variety of different plants here, but one that stands out is this one right here. This is Medusa head, and Medusa head is extremely high in silica, which basically is like chewing on glass. And so animals have a tendency to not perform well or even be inclined to eat this plant. And since they're not grazing it, these are often the plants that are left to go to seed and make more seed, which are contributing to the increase in this plant across our annual rangelands. And so part of this project is looking at whether or not the addition of compost and our clover mix might be able to either compete or possibly decrease the favorability of these plants from continuing to spread. We're just starting to collect the first set of data this spring, and in the coming weeks and months we'll be sharing some of those results.